So this one just sort of appeared out of nowhere. Lord of the Rings War in the North just got a remaster, or maybe an update, I'm not too sure. This is one of those weird titles where it reviewed relatively poorly, but everyone you speak to seems to have fond and positive memories of it. For me, it never really lived up to the hype of Snowblind's previous titles, with Champions of Narath and Dark Alliance. And I have to say, Aspire's previous ports have been pretty hit or miss, so at the very least, I am intrigued to see whether a few technical bumps can transform this forgotten chapter of Middle-earth into a certified banger on the Switch 2. Let's take a look. Originally developed by Snowblind Studios, the masterminds behind Champions of Narath and Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, the company was acquired by Warner Bros. In 2009 and then shut down in 2012, so this was their last title, and maybe the biggest mistake they made was releasing this the same week that Skyrim launched back in 2011. It was never going to get a fair shake, even if it was a good game. But from a narrative perspective, War in the North tackles a corner of Tolkien's universe that feels like a story that didn't strictly need to be told, and kind of felt like a cash grab at the time. It's set concurrently with the events of the Fellowship of the Ring, with the plot pulling your focus away from the main conflict in the south to address a secondary threat brewing in the north. You take control of a freshly forged alliance, Aradin the Human Ranger, Andriel the Elven Lawmaster, and Farron the Dwarven Champion. After meeting Aragorn at the Prancing Pony in Bree, your trio is dispatched to hunt down Agandaur, a formidable black Númenórean lieutenant appointed directly by Sauron to rally the northern forces of orcish hordes, trolls and fell beasts. When you consider the staggering depth of lore available in Tolkien's universe, the narrative trajectory here comes across a little vanilla. It plays out like a fairly standard painted-by-numbers dark fantasy plot where you chase a generic Dark Lord archetype across some uninspired snowy passes and ancient ruins. You do get to visit recognisable stops like Rivendell and chat with a few familiar heavyweights like Elrond, Gandalf and Gimli, but the dialogue and character arcs rarely rise above basic fan service. Even if it's nice to see those familiar faces, it just reminds you of what you're not playing. But it does have basic story beats with decent pacing and does the bare minimum to explain why you are hacking through waves of goblins. It isn't breaking new narrative ground, but it does provide a decent enough excuse to keep on swinging your blade. And as you would expect, it is steeped in standard Tolkien lore. The story and narrative gets a 6.5 out of 10. Where War in the North tried to set itself apart back in 2011, really shows both its age and its hidden charms with the moment-to-moment combat loop. At its core, this is a third-person hack-and-slash action RPG built around a 3-player squad. Back in the original, you had to pick one and stick with that character until the end of each level, but one of the great changes made here is that you can switch and change at any point throughout the story. You have Aradin, a ranger that focuses on rapid melee strikes and precision long-range archery. Then you have Andriel, an elven lawmaster that functions as the party's primary magic user, dropping protective sanctuary domes that heal allies while unleashing rapid-fire elemental spells and AoE knockbacks. And finally you have Farron, the dwarf champion. He's a heavy-hitting tank who excels at sweeping melee cleaves, drawing enemy aggro and shattering heavy armour with big warhammers and axes. It's almost your typical holy trinity that you'd see in an MMO, with a tank, healer and damage dealer, and it's fun to mix and match the playstyles. While the general hacking and slashing has moments of fun, it does feel somewhat uninspired or just a bit slow compared to modern action titles, but the change to allow character swapping does somewhat improve the pacing and just the general fun of the game. And the AI is a little wonky, so sometimes it is just quicker to switch over to that character and manually sort the issue out. The core element of the combat is heavily reliant on the hero mode mechanic, where landing consecutive light and heavy attacks fills a focus meter, and once triggered by your combos, your damage output spikes, allowing you to execute some pretty brutal dismemberment finishes that will lop off orc heads and cleave a troll's arms off. And while it's fun at first, you do quickly tire of it, and it all leads into the RPG loop feeling a bit dated and straight out of the late 2000s. Enemies drop a constant stream of colour-coded loot that we're all familiar with now, ranging from common all the way up to legendary with varying amounts of stats and sockets. And one thing I do appreciate is that the actual appearance of the characters change with the equipment. As you explore, each class also features a unique environmental interaction, allowing you to uncover hidden paths, secret stashes, and valuable resources that other characters can't interact with, which again leads into the positives of being able to switch between characters. And it does sound simple, but this really does push you into exploring the map a bit more. The level design is quite linear, but there are still plenty of secrets to find and lots of extra loot you can miss, so I appreciate that small bit of freedom. Character progression follows your typical action RPG setup, with each level granting skill points to assign, and a skill tree in which each character has a defensive, a melee, and a ranged tree to branch into, with the defensive branches being damage reduction for the dwarf, healing and shielding for the elf, and evasion and stealth for the ranger, but for the most part, they are quite shallow and restrictive. One quite redundant feature though, is that they all have individual inventories, so if anything drops that's useful for another character, you have to manually go into the menu and gift it to the other player, and it just feels a bit clunky. But the lock-on targeting system is a great addition, and it allows you to cycle through enemies and just focus targets that you couldn't originally do. That said, the camera movement while doing so can still feel slightly flighty due to aggressive movement acceleration. This can somewhat be changed in the settings, but not entirely fixed, and while the difficulty can really ramp up, this Legacy Edition does add a modern autosave system that removes much of the old frustration, where if you died you'd have to restart the entire level over again and lose a good half an hour of progression. Overall, it's a relatively fun gameplay loop, it's just a bit dated, even with this touch-up. The gameplay scores a 7 out of 10. Visually, this remaster isn't overly ambitious, but it's a clean, high-resolution translation of the 2011 release. While the textures haven't received a massive manual overhaul and edge aliasing is still present on the character models, the overall bump in image clarity makes the Middle-earth look slightly cleaner than it did on the old hardware. But being completely honest, when looking back at old footage, it isn't exactly a night and day difference. The dark mud-streaked fantasy aesthetic stretching from frozen mountain peaks to the subterranean orc holds maintains a heavy metal fantasy that we've all become familiar with from the abundance of Tolkien's portrayals. But it is a little uninspired, and besides the immediate foreground, it's quite blurry in general. The environmental animations still look pretty decent, like calling in the giant war eagle who swoops down from the sky, snatches orcs in its talons, and rips them apart. And just the small environmental effects like the walls crumbling or the scenery burning, it just looks half decent. And in handheld, the smaller screen really works heavily in the game's favour, masking that lower resolution environment and the background details. And I imagine the portability will be the main push for people to purchase this. Now there is a pretty noticeable difference between the Switch 1 and 2 versions, which honestly did surprise me a little. It's by no means a graphically intensive remaster, so I assumed the only difference would be in the frame rate targets, but the Switch 1 port is noticeably blurrier with many more aliasing issues. But there are no new assets, it's just a minor upscaling. On the audio front, the presentation is a mixed bag due to a strange technical oversight at launch. The underlying sound design itself is fantastic and really visceral, with armour clashes, decapitations and the heavy war horns echoing throughout the levels. But as of right now, on August the 14th, a few days after the release, it's very quiet and muffled regardless of how loud you turn it up, and it's a bit of a dampener on the experience. But hopefully this gets patched before the European release on the 18th. As for the voice acting, it isn't great. I understand this is 15 years old now, but it is very wooden, and again, it just doesn't quite fit that epic setting of Middle-earth. And that's kind of the whole story with this remaster. You have this incredible setting and lore behind it, and it just all fizzles out a bit flat and blurry. The visuals and sound score a 6.5 out of 10. On the performance side, Aspyr have delivered two distinctly different experiences depending on which Switch console you were playing on. On the Switch 2, War in the North targets a fluid 60 FPS at what I think is a native 1080p in both docked and handheld, and while it isn't perfect, the frame rate does seem to hover close to that 60 for the majority of it. There are a few micro stutters and frame pacing issues, especially when things get a bit more hectic, but the overall experience feels pretty responsive and smooth. And probably the best feature of this remaster is that the Switch 2 edition includes a full 2-player split-screen co-op, allowing you and a friend to play through the entire campaign together on a single console. And surprisingly, the FPS seems to remain unchanged. And what I really wasn't expecting was the motion control implementation. I was a bit slow to realise why the aiming felt so strange at first, but once it registered, I actually found it really responsive and fun to use with the bows and magic, and it's just a really good example of when to use gyro controls with minimal latency. For players playing on the original Switch 1, the experience is far more compromised. The older hardware targets 30 FPS, the loading times between zones are noticeably longer, and that great local split-screen co-op has been completely omitted. leaving the online free-player matchmaking is your only multiplayer option. The frame rate isn't perfect, but it somewhat sticks to that 30 FPS, and if you only have to Switch one, it's a solid way to experience the game. The performance scores a 7.5 out of 10. But where War in the North Legacy Edition makes its strongest case is in its value proposition. Launching at a very reasonable price of £17.99, it releases in Europe on August 18th and has been out in North America since the 11th, and those prices will be shown on screen. I believe Limited Run Games just announced a physical release, but it's coming at a later date. A standard playthrough of the main campaign would take about 10 or 12 hours to complete, but if you factor in the new difficulty tiers, the 3 distinct character classes to level up, and the hidden challenge arenas, completionists can easily push this runtime past 20 hours. Add in the couch co-op in the online multiplayer, there's a solid amount of content packed into a budget-friendly package here. Unfortunately, and rather annoyingly in typical Aspyr fashion, there is no direct upgrade path between the 2 versions on the eShop, and they are treated as completely separate games. So if you're looking to make the purchase, just be sure to get the game that you can actually play, as you will not be able to upgrade it or downgrade it to the other version after. All things considered, it's a surprisingly cheap blast to the past, and I'm giving the value a 7.5 out of 10. The Lord of the Rings War in the North Legacy Edition on the Switch 2 gets an overall score of 7 out of 10. It's a modest remaster of one of the more forgettable Lord of the Rings titles. They attempted to tell a new story, but by sprinkling in fan favourite characters and settings, it just reminded me of what I was missing from the mainline entries. The combat has its moments of fun, but it does show signs of age, and the addition of swapping between characters and a new lock-on system does make it more accessible and fun to engage with. The gyro aiming and relatively stable frame rates, along with the split-screen co-op on Switch 2, elevates the throwback just above its original 2011 release. And while it did come out of nowhere and many people weren't expecting it, I wouldn't really view this as a generational leap. If you can look past the current audio bug and accept its classic linear structure, this is a budget-friendly Middle-earth brawler well worth giving a go. So let me know down below if you're planning on picking this up, or if you already have. Have they done enough to warrant you purchasing this game again or for the first time? If you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing, and as usual, stay cozy out there, and I'll see you in the next one.